Hello and welcome to the Tonearm, where we connect you with the people and ideas moving culture forward. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today we put the Tonearm's needle on Ben Wendel. Ben is a Grammy-nominated saxophonist, composer, and co-founder of Kneebody, with a discography that covers post-bop, chamber jazz, and electronic music. He's worked with Bill Frisell, Terence Blanchard, and yes, Prince. His new album, BaRcoDe, just dropped on Edition Records. It's built around a concept that's hard to pull off. 4 of the most in-demand vibraphonists working today, Joel Ross, Simon Moullier, Patricia Brennan, and Juan Diego Villalobos, surrounding one saxophonist. The group developed the music across 2 residencies at the Jazz Gallery in New York City, and the result is something that sits somewhere between chamber jazz and jazz improvisation, with electronics running through all of it. Ben's here to walk us through how this project came together and what it took to write for an ensemble like this. I sort of feel the need to start with what might be an obvious question. That is, can you tell me a little bit about the genesis of BaRcoDe's, what I hope isn't offensive to say, unusual configuration of so many mallet players sitting alongside you? I've been curious since I first was introduced to the record whether you were motivated by the sonic possibilities or whether you had some soundscape sitting in your head that it took these instrumentations to realize. Could you talk about that a little bit?
I would say it's a combination of things. I received a writing commission from the Jazz Gallery in New York. The great thing about that organization is it's really like no strings attached in terms of what you can create with it. Personally, my path as an artist, I always love trying new things or just trying things that are a little outside of my comfort zone. I just sort of naturally gravitate towards that. So I was already kind of in that zone anyway. The first thing that kind of prompted the idea was I was just noticing that there was this significant emergence of a new generation of mallet players on the scene. That instrument, let's say, maybe hasn't been at the forefront as much over past decades, but then more recently, suddenly you have all these just absolutely incredible players. So that was kind of on my mind. There's also influences, like I went to the Eastman School of Music, and some of my closest friends were in a percussion ensemble that eventually became a group called So Percussion, which is really coming right out of that kind of new music, classical minimalism, percussion aesthetic. That's more in the classical field. So that sound has always kind of been in my ear. And in fact, so much so that there was a time I was asked to produce a series of concerts in Munich, and I actually set up a collaboration with my band Kneebody and So Percussion. So those were kind of the things building up to it. And I just thought it was the right time to give it a try. But what I was excited about was not just the instrumentation and wanting to explore that, but just the very rare occurrence of putting together 4 master improvisers on these instruments. You're going to see lots of examples of new music percussion quartets in the classical field, but it's very rare to see all of these great improvisers come together in a band.
Yeah.
I was really excited to see what would happen if I wrote music that, is a reflection of my writing and kind of that aesthetic, but then put it in their hands and then put myself in the middle of that. So that's kind of how it all came together.
For those 4 individuals in particular, what, if any, previous relationships did you have with them, or was it more just about plucking them out because of their musicality?
I was very intentional about the folks that I chose. I had worked and recorded with Joel Ross quite a bit, also Simon Moullier. I remember I went to Joel first and I told him my idea and I said, can we talk about all the great players on the scene? And can we talk about what they bring to the table?
Oh, that's cool.
So I remember after our conversation, I had a list of, 14, 15 names. And I just checked out a bunch of different players. As I did it more and more, I was basically looking for, let's say, like putting together the Avengers of mallet players, So I didn't want players that were, let's say, aesthetically redundant. I was looking for players that each brought their own kind of voice, instrumentation, and approach. And then with Joel's help, actually, I would say, I'm thinking about this person. Do you think personality-wise, they would be a good fit in terms of being like an ensemble, a true kind of team effort. And so slowly that emerged. So Patricia Brennan, I had never worked with before, and I had never worked with Juan Diego Villalobos. But between the four of them, suddenly I had this really wide palette that I could work from. Simon with his one-of-a-kind chromatic balafon and use of effects pedals, Patricia with her extended techniques and use of effects pedals, Juan Diego with his deep knowledge of folkloric percussion coming from Venezuela. So between the four of them, suddenly it was like, okay, I can see the possibilities. So that's kind of how it came together.
How much of the work, other than the Jobim piece, were compositions you had versus new composition for those voices in particular?
I wrote all of that music, including the arrangement of the Jobim piece for that ensemble, for that specific group.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. And
what a gift.
Yeah. And the writing definitely reflects that, like in terms of the written parts that I wrote for them, the forms, the percussive elements, it's all a nod to that ensemble.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the title, BaRcoDe, and especially the sort of the visual logic to it with the capitalization throughout the writing, at the risk of bringing meaning where maybe there isn't any, or just trying to uncover what you were thinking there. Is there something you're suggesting there? Is there a conceptual framework, or is this you just playing with words? Like, I see you laughing at me already.
Well, I have to credit Patricia with coming up with that name and the capitalization. I would say, it kind of reminds me of this quote from a Rick Rubin book where he says sometimes the artist doesn't know why they did something until it's done. So when she presented that suggested name and the capitalization, just instinctually, we all thought that. We were all in a group email together. We said, "Oh, that's perfect." But
I love that.
But for no reason other than it just felt right. But then upon further reflection, one could actually point to some meaning behind it. The most obvious thing being that these mallet instruments are made of bars. What this ensemble is doing is, I think, kind of creating a new kind of language through this instrumentation because they're improvisers. So it's sort of a code that's being created. I think even the quirkiness of the capitalization is sort of a nod to the quirkiness of the project itself. So all of that sort of made sense later when it was done. But initially, we just thought it was a really cool name and a cool way to write that name.
That's such a satisfying answer. Thank you.
Sure, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about this. I'm curious about the sessions and the lead up to them, especially since first of all, you got a lot done in a short period of time, but I guess that's fairly common in jazz and creative music.
Yeah.
You talked earlier about how this work was created for these particular voices and players. What did they get coming in? Like, had they received music beforehand, concepts, or did you go at them cold? Yeah, curious about just sort of how they prepped.
I, as the composer, so far, I'm sort of one that always tends to like to have compositions kind of mostly done and the vision of them is complete and it makes sense. Not everybody's like that. Some people love bringing in sketches and kind of like and see where it goes. I always leave room for that because ultimately I don't really know, especially with a group like this, I didn't really know what it was going to sound like until we played. And there was adaptation, there was adjustment. But yeah, in the case of this music, some of it is actually very complex and challenging, even from a reading standpoint. Like I have a tune called Clouds that's highly technical in terms of the melodies. And even the Olha Maria arrangement it's a beast. It's upwards of 6 pages of reading for the players.
Yeah, it's something else.
So yeah, preparation was that I wrote that music, completed it, made demos of it, have the charts, and sent it to them well in advance of us premiering that music. And I even put aside a full day rehearsal, which is kind of rare in New York. Typically, if you were to even have a rehearsal, maybe it would be a couple of hours, but this was so unique. We spent a whole day set up in the jazz gallery from like 10 to 6.
Yeah.
Working through the music. And then we played that music for 4 sets over 2 nights. And by the end of that, then it really coalesced and came together.
When you said you demoed the songs, that was something else I was curious about. Are your scores traditional or are they visual? Do you draw pictures or are you working in Sibelius and are you like putting in Mallet instrument sounds? Like what is your composition and demo process?
Yeah, and in the case of that music, I mostly used Logic, and Logic has a music notation component, so you can transfer that information into Sibelius or vice versa. So there's a little bit of going back between those two. And then, yeah, I think I chose some very silly kind of Mallet sounds that were just built into the basic library of Logic, nothing too fancy. I think with these players and with that music, technically I could have sent them the charts, which are just like these nice full scores where you have all the information in front of you, see all the parts. I think they could have done all of that and prepared without even having demos.
Mhm.
So the demos were just sort of like an extra bonus, so they had something to work with.
The Jobim piece is interesting for multiple reasons. One, the length. Two, the fact that it's the only piece that is, not your composition and not part of that group of material. Although you mentioned you did arrange it for this group. Can you talk a little bit about the why behind that piece and what was calling out to you and what about this specific ensemble made it the right choice?
I mean, first and foremost, especially with a group like this, I like the idea of including one piece that's an arrangement just to give the listener maybe a reference point. Because I just thought this is a really different kind of group. If I show them what this group does through a song they might be familiar with, maybe it will shed some different kind of light on it. So there was a little bit of that, kind of showing it through a different prism. That piece is just one of my favorite compositions of all time, and I've always been looking for a reason to include it on an album. And even the original version of that piece has a lot of arpeggiation. And so it actually
Lends itself well.
Yep, it was really well suited to an ensemble like this. So for those reasons, that's kind of what pulled me towards the piece. And then in that arrangement, I did write some additional material, like there's a solo form that doesn't exist in the original part, and the intros are a little different. So I kind of molded it to my needs. In terms of the length, it's interesting. We did a version of it where the solos were half as long and the piece was a bit shorter. And I don't know. I just ultimately, when we got to the end of recording the longer version, it just felt better. It just kind of felt like, let's just live in this space for a long time. Like, let's just be in this meditative kind of world. So it was more just like a feeling.
And that sonic environment is really a sort of a luxury of those particular players because of the use of effects and extended technique. And it's real, like you have so much opportunity to explore sound.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, between those four players and what they're playing, and then obviously I'm using effects too. There's a lot there. And there's something really, as I discovered through doing this project and being in the middle of that for the concerts, there's something just highly hypnotic and trance-like the effect of those instruments is really something. It kind of reminds me, kind of a weird stretch, but like if you've ever gone to any kind of ceremony that has like singing bowls,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah. Sound baths, things like that, gongs.
Yeah. So it's like, it kind of has the impact of that and also the impact of just percussion, which also can really do that. So it lives somewhere right in between. And I think it has a really hypnotic effect. Yeah, I wanted to lean into that.
You know, I didn't see any photos of the Jazz Gallery performances, I don't think. How were you configured on stage? Did you stand in the middle of a semicircle or something? Like, because what you're describing sounds like you really had the opportunity to live in that soundscape.
Yeah, it was heaven. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was like this massive semicircle with a 5-octave marimba, 3 vibraphones, a balafone, percussion, and then I was just dead center. And I just bathed in it.
So many harmonics. Yeah. I mean, that had to be really something.
Yeah.
Really something.
Yeah. And for everybody that was there too, the live impact of that ensemble is really something.
Yeah.
People commented on that quite a bit, the people that were at the concerts.
Something else you were saying about the Jobim piece that I really appreciate is how you talked about how you molded it to your needs.
Yeah.
And to me, that's like such a sign of a sturdy composition that it could withstand, you know, whether it's its melody or its construct can withstand that adaptation. I love that about a piece when you can put it in these other contexts and it still has its identity, but it can be translated. I love that.
Yeah, it translates. And, you know, a piece like that, the harmonic movement is very much, you know, in the spirit of, you know, like Bach or someone. So there is this sturdiness to it in the same way that, you know, a lot of Bach's writing just continues to work and continues to live on many different instruments. Jobim has that too. The DNA of his compositions are just right there. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm curious about your experience as a player in Los Angeles. You know, when I think about that scene, and this is not just in the current sort of contemporary era, but it's always struck me as such a pragmatic, like working musicians scene and vibe, like because of the entertainment industry and just the confluence of musical cultures. Has that element of the scene, or how has that element of the scene impacted basically how you think about orthodoxy in jazz or in creative music? Like, you know, do you feel as though your palette is wider for that experience, or is there something like intrinsic about Ben that that would be the composer you are and the player you are?
Yeah, I was raised in LA and I came up in that scene. I've lived in New York for, 15 years now. And so I've had a real hybrid kind of experience in that way. I would say my professional path and all the different things that I've done along that road, not just in the jazz world, but outside of it, is more just a reflection of me, I would say. I'm a huge fan of just experiencing great music and learning through any genre. And I'm very open to collaboration in that way. I always have been. LA and New York really represent different things. And if anything, I learned different things becoming a professional. Like in LA, just as you said, there's just a tremendous amount of industry related work. And so I would say a lot of the skills that I learned growing up really served me well during that time, like studio work, you know, the ability to play in tune, the fact that I played bassoon and multiple woodwinds, being able to read really well, all of those things. And that definitely had an influence on me. But also just the randomness of life had an influence on me. You know, again, I can look back now and go, okay, that really affected my path. You know, when I was 14, I became friends with a guy named Terence Martin, who was going to Santa Monica High School with me. Because of our friendship and our love of the saxophone and music, he introduced me to his world, which is that he started to take me down to Leimert Park in the Crenshaw district. And that's where there's a club called The World Stage, which Billy Higgins ran for many years. So because of Terrace, I suddenly was hanging and playing with folks like him. Terrace ended up becoming a really prominent hip hop producer. He produced Kendrick Lamar and has worked with Snoop Dogg. Because of Terrace, that I worked with Snoop Dogg and things like that. So there was an openness in my mind to it anyway. And then there's just the circumstances of life that exposed me to some things that were just amazing at the time and really kind of set my path. And then I came to New York, and New York became a portal, both working back in LA professionally and then working a lot around the world and internationally. And that kind of opened up other doors. Suddenly I was playing at the Village Vanguard and collaborating with, musicians that are on that scene and the New York scene. So it's been a long and windy path.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, I think it's just my personality and openness to different genres and things like that. Just as, Duke Ellington said, there's two types of music, good music and bad music. It's like,
That's right.
So I've never really shied away from dipping my toes in different worlds if I think the music is compelling.
It's interesting because I speak with a lot of artists who maybe come from a classical training or even a conservatory training or background. They have to be very intentional sort of about keeping their open-mindedness, their interaction with improvisation. And I think a theme in a lot of that type of conversation I have with artists is that it has evolved generationally. It's not as closed and sort of single-minded as it was maybe even as recently as 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that for you. Like, were you at all put off by mindsets at conservatory, or was Eastman not oriented that way?
Well, again, that was just a really lucky moment and kind of an interesting moment, which is that when they started their bachelor's degree for jazz, they decided to bring in two graduates of Cal Arts, Ralph Alessi, the trumpeter, and the piano player, Michael Caine. And Eastman at that time was absolutely this just old, awesome, conservative. We're going to give you a real hearty education that's just really rooted. And when you leave, you're going to be a commensurate musician, So there was sort of that. And then Ralph and Mike brought this completely different West Coast, Charlie Hayden, open-mindedness thing of like, let's question everything. What does it mean to be an artist? How do you find your path? And they were really, I think at that time, really questioning neoconservatism in the music and whatnot. And so for the people that went to school during that time, myself included, it was a really thought-provoking time. Luckily for me, I was exposed to both sides and benefited from both sides. But ultimately, I think where I landed in terms of how the music has evolved is it's been a little bit about who I am and then how I reacted to things that came into my life. And so in that moment, I was presented with a lot of information and a lot of things to think about in terms of individuality versus tradition, acknowledging that we're on this continuum. Like I cannot musically exist without what has happened before me, but then what does that actually mean? And how do we find our own place within it? I ultimately don't think I'll ever have the answer to that. And I don't think anyone that says they do, I would question that because I think it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, the answers are dead ends.
Yeah. So, but to your point, I certainly have seen the barrier, let's say, between classical musicians and improvising musicians. I've seen that barrier become much more porous. And that's been lovely to see. There's so many great new music ensembles that have emerged in the last couple decades that really point to that, that where there's just an absolute openness to improvisation in the way that they're comfortable with it and playing outside of genre and playing in ways that just weren't traditionally done before.
On the topic of education, teaching seems to be, sort of vital in your career. Like, it doesn't strike me as like this is something you do on the side to make ends meet, or, or that it's opportunistic. Like, there seems to be a lot of intention and a lot of energy devoted to being a teacher. What do you find yourself returning to thematically when you talk to younger players? What's the urgent thing you feel that you need to impart to them?
That's such a good question. I was joking with a friend the other day, often when we teach, I mean, for me, one of the reasons that I'll continue to teach, I actually don't teach as much as I used to anymore. But when I do, it's so funny how it's like you're looking in a mirror. You start to tell them what you intuitively know they need, and you realize, oh yeah, this is a good reminder for yourself. Like you should be thinking about the same things. And so I love that cyclical part of the process of teaching, which is the teacher also remains a student and can learn new things through the process of teaching, and the student can show you something. Every student's different. Every student's on a different path. Some have just really pragmatic technical needs that need to be addressed. Other people, their worst enemy is not their ability, but their emotional state, and they're better served getting out of the practice room and maybe reading some books or doing some therapy or taking a hike.
Yeah.
It's a really fun process to teach, and it's a really important thing, and it's a very delicate thing. And I think anybody that teaches this music has a great responsibility to protect what it is and also convey that information in a way that lifts the next generation.
That's such an expansive definition of the teacher's role. And it resonates for me because I've personally had those experiences earlier in my life, whether it was with music and not having a teacher that was a good fit or who was sort of sensitive at the individual level. I also had it in my academic career. I can remember specifically 35 years later, I can remember sitting in a classroom having a professor completely derail me from the path I thought I was going to be on with what she probably thought was just like an exasperated, glib comment she made.
Mm-hmm.
It probably says less about my determination or more about my lack of determination. But it's fascinating the impact a teacher can have, right? Like good, bad, and otherwise.
Yeah, it's huge. And I know many people that had bad experiences and it really changed their path. I also know of experiences where, and I can speak for myself too, that I've had some quote unquote bad teachers. And then I realized later they were bad, but actually they were really helpful because everything I didn't like about what they were doing actually kind of helped me figure out what do you like, so there was actually kind of this clarifying fire to their badness that ultimately served me. But yeah, I do think it's a great responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah, it sure is. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Village Vanguard. Whenever an artist has performed there or recorded there, I try to talk about that for a minute, about the room, about the history, about the boldness of being a saxophone player on that stage and in that tradition.
Yeah.
I don't have a specific question for you, but I would love to hear your thoughts and what your Village Vanguard is.
For me, the experience was such a positive one, which is, first of all, the honor of getting invited to lead a band there, then having played there many times now. I've recorded an album there. I do remember the first time I was leading my band there, Lorraine Gordon was still around. And there's Lorraine's table, which is always this one table, and there she was. And
wow.
And I'm walking to the stage, and I was definitely scared. But something amazing happened, which was such a great reminder. And it actually really reminded me of the times that I got to play with Billy Higgins, which was I got on stage and I suddenly felt like all of the spirits in that room and all of the music that had been played was this like lifting, supportive energy.
Wow.
It's like, do it, man. Like be yourself, express yourself, lean in. This is the emotion. Finally, when I was on that stage, was not fear. It was this other thing. So I realized, and Billy Higgins had that a lot. Like when you would play with him, he was able to convey the message of this music through his playing in a way where if I was having a bad day or if I felt down or whatever it was, the moment we started playing and I lived within his beat, I suddenly felt joy and community and collaboration. The Vanguard is a really potent version of that. You get on that stage and you suddenly just feel this amazing mixture of gratitude and powerful history, but support. Like all the ghosts in there, all the spirits in there are friendly. So that's my experience with that club. And it's remained that way. Every week is really magical and it's a special kind of time warp every time.
Yeah. Is it true? I've had at least one other artist tell me that when you're booked to play there, you generally know very, very far in advance. Is that, and I'm curious, like, what does that mean in terms of what you're going to present? Is it a lead up or are you at the point where like, you're cool, it's just a gig, or like, how do you think about it, knowing it's looming?
Well, I always like to use each week that I get there. And yeah, they book way in advance. So like 1 to 2 years in advance, because it's such a special opportunity to play 6 nights. Every time I like to try like a different band or a special guest or something, just to try something new.
Yeah.
Not everybody's like that. Some people, they always bring their same band, which is also beautiful in a different way. But yeah. So for example, I'm going to be playing there in July, and I'll be playing with a lot of the musicians that I've worked with before that I have a long history with. But then I had this opportunity to bring in a guest, and John Patitucci is going to play bass for that week, and we've been talking about doing something together for a really long time. So I thought, this is such a cool opportunity
that's lovely
to try that. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about working with Steve and Nate on the post-production. It's really interesting how you've got like that. That's a little bit of a community and world now, right? Like, yeah. I'm curious what your shared history with the different people around you, like, what does that contribute, or what does it make possible that, this isn't just, it's not just like, oh, I've heard there's this professional cat, I'm going to call him up and ask him to master the record. Like it feels like there's an element of almost like safe hands or understanding. And rather than me tell you what that is, I'd love to hear your take on that.
I mean, Steve Wood and Nate Wood. So Steve Wood is an incredible engineer, composer, producer, and has just the most amazing ears. And then his son, Nate Wood, became this incredible musician who also is a great engineer and mastering guy. And so they're really a powerful combination, those two. And I jokingly call them Chip and Block Productions. Because the combination of those two, because they have different sort of aesthetic strengths and things that they love, but the combination is really potent. So I've actually done a couple albums with Steve at this point. And I always go to Steve because I think it's really one of his fortes, is when I have something that's, let's say, more orchestral feeling in nature. He's just a master of creating space and depth for ensembles like that. So he mixed my album All One, which got a Grammy nomination a couple of years ago. And that was like a perfect example. It was me stacking upwards of 20 to 30 saxophones and bassoons. I was creating these like little miniature orchestras and inviting guests. And he was able to take all those voices being my voices, in the same room and put them in a space. So when this BaRcoDe project came up, I thought, oh man, this is just perfect for Steve. This is going to be another one where making all of that make sense, making all of those instruments that have really wide kind of stereo sounds to them and fitting them within a mix. This is the guy for the job. So Steve was really an important part of that. For the first time ever, he was actually at the recordings, which was really beautiful and was incredibly helpful. Like the way we set up all the instruments strategically during the recording actually like set the template for the album. Oh. And in fact, I'd never done this before, but it actually required a conference call with the tracking engineer and Steve and me to say, like, this is what we're dealing with. How are we going to get this to work? And then Nate has mastered many of my albums. Yeah, he's just a perfect aesthetic match to what Steve does. So I really think of them as a powerful combination. And I do feel unsafe hands when they mix and master my albums. And I think I think relative to a typical mixed jazz album, I think they really bring a super elevated produced aesthetic to my albums that I think really kind of sets it apart in a way and brings out the nature of the difference of the music and the ensemble. So I'm really grateful to work with them and just to be lifelong friends with them.
When something happens like All One getting the Grammy nomination, as the creator, as the artist involved, do you have any sense of like, oh, this is the special one? Like, do you have any sense of the why? Like, what made that record connect? Do you think it had to do with your intention, or did you reach some particular peak of your powers, or?
I don't think so. I think it's kind of a weird example, but it's popped into my head, like Maurice Ravel's most famous piece is Bolero. He wrote Bolero as an orchestral warm-up piece. Did he think that was going to be his most beloved piece, the piece that he wrote as a warm-up for the orchestra? Definitely not. I think where I'm going with this is just, for me at least, the artist makes the art and is proud of every single thing that they do and tries to make it as clear of an expression of what they're hoping for as possible. And then how the world takes it and reacts, it's kind of just out of your hands, and the thing that you're most proud of and that you think might do well, it doesn't. It does the opposite. And the thing you're kind of maybe more conflicted on and you're not quite sure what the message was, that does really well. So it's just, all expectations are gone once you release it into the wild. I loved getting the nomination. It's beautiful to get that recognition, but why it happened for that one and not another one, your guess is as good as mine.
Something else I wanted to ask you about was the relationship with Edition Records. For me, as a listener and as someone who speaks with a lot of artists, I've perceived and noted such an increase in the adventurousness and consistency of what comes my way from them. There's something about this record that feels very Edition to me, in that on one reading of it or one listening of it, it's very accessible. It's not shallow. You can spend time with it and find the challenge in it. It's the substance in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be a hallmark of what they do. I think about some of the artists, and I won't call anybody out in particular, but I have very similar experiences with the music. It's like, oh, this is easy for me to consume. And then when I spend time, I say, oh, there's so much more here. I love that. It makes you want to trust a label. It makes you able to trust a label. And that's always something I've loved as a music lover. I'm curious how you think about audience. And I don't mean that in a marketing sense. I mean in terms of like, do you ever have a visualization of who you're playing for or who this might land for? Are you completely in a vacuum and you don't think about audience? I'm really curious about your relationship psychologically and otherwise with listeners.
Yeah. I just think for me personally, like in the time that we live in, and, I tour around the world playing so many different venues. It's like, I personally find it impossible to grasp. Every time I do a tour and play and I meet people, there's always a portion of them where it's sort of like, okay, I can wrap my head around that. It's linear. Here's a sax player that's a big sax playing fan, or whatever. Here's someone who's a fan of Kneebody, or here's someone who's a fan of the compositions. But then there's this whole other component where I don't know how they found their way to me, but it's definitely, to me, it's sort of that indicative of living in a time that we're living in, like just the internet, and putting things out, and then it's the strangest things splash back. Generally speaking, kind of along the same lines as your question about the albums and what gets an award and what doesn't. I kind of feel the same way, because I do feel it's a bit uncontrollable. Like, it's just not, even if you were intentional about it, I don't know that it would have much impact. I don't think it's something that you can, I guess if you really just stayed in a lane and that lane was much more focused in a particular aesthetic way in terms of what you do, maybe you could sort of say, okay, I think I can expect these kind of audience members in these type of venues, but in terms of what I do, at least, it's been pretty eclectic. So then the result is pretty eclectic, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned Edition. I would say that the consistency in terms of who I've worked with and what I've done is just really about finding people that have like-minded philosophies. So, Dave Stapleton, who's the owner of Edition, he's a great musician in his own right. And it's really what you're experiencing is his taste and aesthetic, and it's his own openness and things that he likes that are forming the catalog. I think when I think about that kind of like, yeah, he gravitates towards people that kind of look at music in that way, kind of not too segmented. He picks people that are kind of open and trying new things with each album and kind of exploring. So that has a sound to it.
Yeah, absolutely. As a listener, I may not be able to articulate it verbally, but I can perceive the addition story, sort of. Like I definitely feel it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. When you think about the artist. So I definitely fit that mold. And that's why we've had a really nice run of albums. Yeah. This would be number 4, actually. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something these days.
That is
Yeah.
totally.
If the shoe were on the other foot and Joel came to you and said, I need to put together the Saxophone Avengers.
Oh, I love this. And he's in the middle.
Could you do
totally. Yeah, absolutely. That would be a really fun conversation, actually, depending on what Joel would want.
Yeah.
But I love that.
Are you going to give me any?
Who I would choose? Oh no, no, I'm not shy about that, but there's just too many.
Yeah.
There's too many great players and doing so many great things, so many different things. So I don't even know where to begin. I'd probably give a minimum 30 names.
It's always, it seems like it is the instrument in this space where between the saxophone and the piano, we're never left with it. There's always a bounty of great players.
There really is. I remember having a conversation once with the great John Ellis. We were trying to theorize, like, how many, we were like going through categories and we said, how many great sax players are alive today that have their own individual voice and this and that. We had all these parameters. And that was already this like massive number. And then if we take that away, how many are just like unbelievably incredible players and professional and can play anything and just, maybe you wouldn't recognize them, but they're, we passed 1,000 really fast.
Wow.
So it's awesome. It's a big, vibrant world. And so I definitely never have this feeling like I'm missing inspiration or fire under my heels when I'm looking for things to work on, Yeah.
It's interesting. Because I had a few minutes on my hands and I like to go down rabbit holes, I looked back through the 300 or so episodes we've done here, and I wanted to see like, what are the clusters of instruments? I was very surprised to find the harp. There's so many interesting harpists today, certainly pianists, certainly saxophone players, but it was an interesting exercise. And it made me think about, it would be fun to assemble the Avengers where the commonality was I've spoken to them all.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, of each instrument. Yeah, totally.
And the other thing you said that really resonated with me was the interesting thing, and I don't mean to draw the equivalence in any manner whatsoever, but I do have the same experience where I'll run into somebody who has heard the podcast or heard an episode, and I'm taken aback because I actually get embarrassed because I never actually think about there's listeners. Like I do this every week and I've been doing it, year in, year out. And it's like, oh yeah, well, of course, if I'm going to put it out there, somebody's going to listen to it.
Man, I'm just shocked. Yeah, the internet is such a weird place. I have because it's just helpful for announcing things on socials or whatnot. I have a Google alert, when my name comes up, and I mean, just the weirdest stuff, like a random 5-minute interview after a show that I did that I didn't think twice about. And then, 5 years later, someone comes up to me and says, you remember when you said that? And it's like, or a show that I didn't even know was recorded and suddenly a transcription pops up. I mean, it's just such a wild thing. Yeah. You put it out there. You don't know how it reverberates back.
Last thing I wanted to ask you, does BaRcoDe point towards any specific direction for you? Or, I didn't want to ask the hack question, which was what was next.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in your style of approaching projects. In other words, do you work linearly or do you have like all these concepts that are at different different points on parallel paths? And at what point does one move to the fore?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that I always have, let's say 2 or 3 ideas ahead of me that I'm like, I would love to do that at some point. So there's always something coming down the pipeline in that way. And for me, it's still to this point, it's a lot about like, even the ideas that I'm still doing, I'm sort of like, okay, that's still different. So it's sort of like I'm I'm still in the process of doing things that are still kind of like expanding out the discography versus things that feel, I wouldn't say redundant, but are more like, okay, you did a quartet album. Here's another quartet album, so I guess it's linear in that sense that I kind of see the other things I'd like to do ahead of me. So it's a line of sorts, and then pulling it off is more just about capacity and having the time to put it together in the midst of a active career.
And who else is available?
Yeah, all of those things. Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of know the next thing that I'm working on. On that note, logistically, it's going to be a beast. So like that's a kind of a perfect example of, who knows when that thing will be done, but hopefully it won't take too long.
Thank you for tuning in to the Tonearm. If you enjoyed this conversation, check out one of the other 300 episodes available in our free archive at thetonearm.com. While you're there, join our mailing list or consider becoming a paid supporter. The Tonearm is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson. Editing and sound design is by Terry Grant, and our theme music is by BaRcoDe, spelled B-U-R-D-Y. Thank you for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.
After listening to this episode, head to thetonearm.com, our online journal covering unexpected music and culture. Right now on the Tonearm, you'll find features on guitarist and international anthem artist Gregory Ullman, legendary bassist Mike Watt's collaboration with spacey duo Galextasy, Montreal avant jazz quartet Bellbird, folk singing sisters duo Sybil, and so much more. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter, Talk of the Tonearm. That's thetonearm.com. The Tonearm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.